And before I begin, I want to offer a shout out to Dr. Steve Berg. He's actually not here today. He's a great friend of the Society. Many of you know him as the history chair at Shippensburg University, where I was privileged to receive my master's degree in 2014. So Steve is actually responsible for the genesis of my talk tonight. It began as a class project when I was in graduate school in 2013. Oh, thank you. All right, how's this? Better? Better. Oh, excellent. Wow, thank you. I can hear myself. So at Steve Berg's urging, I and a number of students got together to explore and document the impact of World War I here in South Central Pennsylvania, because we were coming up, even in 2013, on the soon-to-be 100th anniversary of the U.S. involvement in World War I. So our efforts resulted in the publication of this book entitled Duty Calls at Home. And if you'd like to learn more about how World War I affected local schools, colleges, and society in general, you might want to pick up a copy of the book. And very helpfully, Kim Laidler, where are you, Kim? She's in the back, and I think she's going to set up afterwards in some suitable location an opportunity for you to purchase a copy of the book. And so again, my hat's off to Steve, and again, my hat's off to Dave and to the Society for the invitation to speak to you here tonight. So as you may have gleaned from Dave's introduction, during one of my former lives, I spent a great deal of time in the Pennsylvania National Guard. So for my contribution to this book, I was naturally drawn to the only National Guard unit in Cumberland County during the World War II era. That was Company G of the 8th Infantry Regiment, a unit known informally as the Gobin Guards. Their armory, shown in this picture, still stands on Northwest Street in Carlisle. And I should note, by the way, that this image, like most of those that you'll be seeing this evening, comes to us courtesy of the Society's fabulous photo archive. So Richard and Rob, thank you for all your help in putting this visual material together. So 100 years ago, the soldiers of Company G, like guardsmen all over the country, were called up out of their civilian lives and sent off to Army training camp en route to combat on the Western Front. During the course of my research, I was struck by how much the community response to their departure resembled what we see today when local Guard units are mobilized and sent overseas to defend American interests. Then, as now, I saw the same pride and affection for the hometown boys, as they were called, the same flurry of care packages handed out to make their lives a little bit more comfortable, and the same anxious hope for their safe return from a theater of war. Nowadays, as we scan 250 years of American military history, it's hard for most people to grasp what our involvement in World War I was all about. The Revolutionary War, for example, embodies our founding ideals as a nation. The Civil War presents a bloody saga of sin and redemption. The Second World War saw the heroic defeat of tyranny. Even the War of 1812, which didn't accomplish much else in the long term, at least gave us the Star-Spangled Banner, a song that surely has no controversial implications today. But by contrast, the meaning and memory of World War I became clouded over time as the flaws in the terms of the peace became evident. But in the summer of 1917, the people of Carlisle, like most Americans, felt a clear sense of what we were getting into and why. President Wilson, in his address to Congress on April 2nd, 1917, had made the case for war in almost messianic terms. Our object, he said, is to vindicate the principles of peace and justice in the life of the world as against selfish and autocratic power, and to set up among the really free and self-governed peoples of the world such a concept of purpose and of action as will henceforth ensure the observance of those principles. The world, said Wilson, must be made safe for democracy. Most people came to accept Wilson's view of the war as a moral crusade. And bolstered by their fellow citizens at home, more than 2 million US troops eventually deployed to the battlefields of Europe in righteous pursuit of victory. Included in their ranks were the boys of Company G. Many of them were already veterans. The summer before, in 1916, they'd been called up for active service down in Texas. Along with 100,000 other guardsmen, they were supporting what was dubbed a punitive expedition in Mexico. Regular Army troops had gone south on a futile campaign to hunt down Pancho Villa, a revolutionary warlord who'd killed 17 Americans on a raid into New Mexico. Their commander, by the way, was General John Pershing, who went on to lead American forces in World War I. Legal constraints kept the Guardsmen from joining Pershing and his regulars on the chase into Mexico. The Constitution limits federal use of the state militia, in essence, the National Guard, to suppressing insurrection and repelling invasions. The Constitution says nothing about allowing the militia to invade somebody else. So the Guardsmen had the job of sitting on the border to keep Pancho Villa from heading north again into US territory. As this photo suggests, it wasn't particularly intense duty. The only enemies they faced were heat, dust, insects, and boredom. A bit of doggerel from a National Guard publication at the time captured the prevailing mood. I quote, "With reconnaissance, road work, and pipelines, we were busy from morning till night. Though our rifles got rusty and crusty, our picks and shovels kept bright." Well, despite that, the Mexican border mission was good training for the serious fighting the Guard would see 2 years later. In February 1917, the Carlisle Guardsmen came home to a hero's welcome. As their train pulled into the station, the sons of Civil War veterans fired a cannon salute from the grounds of Dickinson College. At the ensuing ceremony, a professor from Dickinson waxed eloquent. "Some mean scamp may have tried to get your job or steal your girl," he said, "but your girl stood by you, and your job, or a better one, awaits your reappearance. You left us a company of citizens, you return a company of soldiers. Mother Cumberland, who sent you forth with her benedictions and her prayers, hails your safe and honorable return with glad thanksgiving, and welcomes back again to the fold of her citizenship you who have never been absent from her heart." Well, accolades like this continued across town with special church services, banquets, civic tributes. But the men of Company G only enjoyed a short break from military duty. After Congress declared war on Germany on April 6th, Guard units nationwide were ordered to expand to their full wartime strength of 150 men. Members of the Carlisle unit toured Cumberland County by car, urging young men to, quote, "come in out of the draft." By volunteering for the Guard, they argued, locals could serve with friends and neighbors instead of being thrown in with total strangers drafted into the new National Army. Recruiting efforts were still underway on July 15, 1917, when all of Pennsylvania's Guardsmen were called into federal service. To avoid constitutional questions, they were drafted into the Army as individuals, but with the expectation that their units would remain intact. Before they could ship out to Army training camp, the camps, in fact, hadn't even been built yet, the troops of Company G had 2 months at home to prepare. They couldn't just hang around waiting for movement orders. It was too hot inside their armory, and it was getting more crowded by the day. So the Guardsmen set up this tent camp at the old Carlisle Fairgrounds. The former Maslin carpet factory moved there en masse in August of 1917. During the day, troops spent their time marching and drilling and brushing up on basic military skills. On evenings and weekends, though, they were the toast of the town. The churches of Carlisle held numerous patriotic services in their honor that summer. One service at St. Paul's Lutheran Church, next door to the Armory, featured a military-style tent, a cluster of waving and American flags, and the presentation of a carnation by the Women's Missionary Society to every soldier present. A sermon on the Dickinson campus paid tribute to the guardsmen sitting in the pews. "You can be assured," said the pastor, "that your names will go down in the history of Carlisle and the county, that your names will be recorded just the same as those of the men who went out from here to fight the Revolutionary War, the War of the Rebellion, and the Spanish-American War. As you go out, remember that the honor of your country rests with you." Other expressions of community support flourished that summer of 1917. The Red Cross chapter in Carlisle collected donations of toothpaste, writing tablets, and other personal items to hand out in what they called comfort kits. Among the contributors, duly recognized in the Carlisle Sentinel, were, and I quote, "Eccles Drugstore, 150 cakes of soap. Wagner's Hardware Store, 3 penknives, 8 pairs of scissors. And Miss Kate Dale, $1. A fundraiser at Dickinson brought in $700 to buy extra rations over and above the official Army allotment. And the troops were honored guests at the country estate of shoe magnate John Lindner, whose son was a member of Company G. During their soiree, they took time out to occupy Lindner's private golf course, taking advantage of the hazards and bunkers to conduct rudimentary war games. A comparable outpouring of public support extended to the whole war effort. In workrooms like this, Red Cross volunteers in Carlisle produced some 100,000 surgical dressings, hospital garments, and knitted socks and sweaters for the troops. Cumberland County joined the national drive to sell Liberty bonds to help finance the war. This ad in the Sentinel exhorted readers to avoid the dreaded label of slacker. Citizens were urged to sign up now. Prove to yourself and your neighbors that you're a real American citizen. At the Carlisle Industrial School, Indian Industrial School, female students offered community programs on how to conserve vital food production by cooking meatless and wheatless meals. All around the town, young women of fashion could at least show solidarity with the cause by adopting military-style headgear. This newspaper ad observed approvingly that turbans and hats designed on army lines are a marked mode for this fall. And as Christmas approached, wives and girlfriends could trek to Globe's department store in Harrisburg, where they could find just the right gift for their soldier boy. A Sam Brown belt, perhaps a soft, downy muffler in khaki color, or the all-important metallic trench mirror to help him arrange his toilette. Well, on September 10, 1917, Company G was set to head off to Army training camp in Georgia. To mark their departure, the local Chamber of Commerce had organized a huge parade. The route ran all the way from the fairgrounds to the train station at High and Pitt Streets. Factories and businesses were asked to close 2 or 3 hours in advance so everyone would be free to take part. A half hour before the start, a general fire alarm alerted residents to take their places along the parade route. In the end, 7,000 people showed up to send the guardsmen on their way. The event was charged with emotion. A reporter for the Carlisle Evening Herald captured the drama in one breathless sentence. He wrote, "Amid the goodbye, good luck, God bless you of thousands, with the sound of a saluting cannon ringing in their ears, while on one side the Carlisle band played the popular Grey Mare tune, and on the other side a great mass of persons stood in silent tribute, with here and there a scattered personal farewell, or the suppressed sobs of a mother or sister or some other loved one, the men of Company G last evening went toward the flaming sunset in the west on the first stage of their journey to France to battle for the freedom of the world. After that inspiring send-off, the Guardsmen's time in Georgia proved to be somewhat of an anticlimax. They endured almost 8 months of dull routine at a makeshift training site outside Augusta. To break the monotony, a sergeant in Company G was reported to be fattening up a very fine goose for Thanksgiving dinner. Meanwhile, his buddies were trying to catch pet snakes. And 2 sympathetic residents of Carlisle decided to augment the men's rations by shipping down a barrel of sauerkraut and 2 barrels of apples. As part of an Army-wide reorganization, the Guardsmen soon saw their old regiment disbanded, and they became part of a new, larger regiment, which the authorities deemed was more suitable for modern warfare. They took the changes in stride, as soldiers do, but they were clearly looking forward to the chance to prove themselves in combat. That opportunity came closer in May 1918, when Company G boarded the USS Aquitania, a sister ship to the Titanic, and set sail for Europe. Finally, on July 6th, they saw their first action against a small enemy force in the Marne sector of northeastern France. That clash proved to be a precursor to the last major German offensive of the war. The next 100 days brought a relentless Allied drive to push the Germans back to their pre-war borders and force their government to surrender. The end came with the signing of the armistice on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. Europe was now at peace, but that peace was bought at a terrible price. 11 million military deaths on all sides, 7 million civilian deaths. The United States, even with its late arrival to the war, suffered 53,000 killed in action. The boys of Carlisle bore a share of that cost. 153 Guardsmen climbed aboard that outbound train from Carlisle on September 10, 1917. 17 of them never returned, their lives lost amid the horrors of the Western Front. Their names appear on this plaque inside the post-war Gobin Guard's armory next to the fairgrounds. In the years that followed, isolationists and other critics came to question the value of their sacrifice. The promise of a new international order, piously invoked by Wilson, was withering in the face of renewed tension and hostility. By the 1930s, the war to end all wars was proving to be anything but. Ernest Hemingway, wounded in that war, went so far as to declare, "We were fools to be sucked in once in a European war, and we should never be sucked in again." That was in 1935. But back in the summer of 1917, the people of Carlisle had taken American idealism to heart. They sent their boys off to war with a spirit of pride, respect, and goodwill that still speaks to us today. The next time you're in Carlisle, go down West Street to the old Company G Armory, which is now preserved as a meeting hall for St. Paul's Church. Take a look at this new wayside marker alongside the building. In June, I was privileged to join our friends in historic Carlisle in dedicating it. The marker commemorates the spot where 100 years ago, the Great War called at home, and the young men of Carlisle stepped up to respond. The cause that drew them away prompts me to make a final observation. As these hometown boys went toward that flaming sunset in the west, they embodied a notion that may still be relevant today. The notion that American leadership, however imperfect, might just make the world a safer, better place for all of us. Thank you.